Jose, I don't know if you heard the little beep.
I
Our
did.
person is here. Let's bring on our good boy, Andrew Berkshire. You want to bring him in?
Hello.
Hey,
Hello.
how's it going, guys?
Good. How about
Great.
you?
I should give the intro right now. First off, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us right now. I know that it comes at a time where the game has been through a lot in this period.
Yeah, and I'm behind, so I don't even know what the score is actually.
I don't want I don't want to tell you what the score is right now because I definitely don't want to spoil anything for you. There has been a lot going on in this game. A couple of questions though. First off, I just want to thank you again for joining us, and I want to just
Oh,
give
my pleasure.
everybody a little background on Andrew. Andrew and I actually go back a little bit in terms of I used to edit a lot of his work for Sportsnet.ca when he was a contributor with us. Kind of one of my favorite things to edit because you knew they were coming when Andrew would ask for the pictures for his for the graphs he would do, and I'm like,
Yeah,
oh, Berkshire's coming soon. We can get ready for it, and they're always great reads. I actually do miss them a lot. But I do know that you're contributing to the Montreal Gazette right now.
correct. Yeah.
I know that the pandemic life has been a little tough for, I mean, all of us, especially for you guys out there in Quebec.
Yeah.
And the little ones probably got you pretty busy.
Yes, definitely.
But how have you been doing, Andrew?
I've been doing all right, trying to enjoy the time off with working less this year, but definitely open for more work. That's for sure.
Yes.
It's been a little bit of a different adjustment because the stuff with the Gazette right now is just like not a lot of writing. It's like every other week. So it's a really rough adjustment to go from writing 4 research columns per week to one every other week, which is like you just don't get into the flow at all. Like I'm used to just like banging out ideas all the time. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh no, I have something to do this week. I have to get on it. I have to figure out something to write about. So it's like, I guess I should be more proactive and like keep like a notebook of like ideas to write down, but just hasn't been that way so far.
I've always been curious. I was curious I was meant to ask our columnist during the time because the funny thing was they hadn't really filed them. They didn't write many stories while there was no hockey between that period of like March to like the summertime. And like I remember Eric Francis has sent me something. He's like, "Oh, I guess the vacation's over for you guys." I was like, "Over for me? I was working the whole time. You're the one that's at the vacation, nothing to write about."
Yeah, no kidding.
How hard is it like to go all that time without writing, and then for some, you might have a period where you're not writing a lot, and then all of a sudden you got to come up with a bunch of ideas.
Well, it kind of depends because like I was doing the same thing for about 5 years between Sportsnet and other contracts that I had. Essentially 4 to 5 articles a week every week during the season. So like it's really in like the in a regular season, like the January, February, March time. That's the worst because you've kind of not necessarily settled into a pattern, but like you've gone through more of the exciting stories at that point. The hot players who might fall off or the players who are bound to break out. Most of that stuff is kind of happening. It's just like the dog days of the regular season. So you end up writing a lot of the same kind of story using the same kind of data, and you're a little bit bored and then you get like reinvigorated for the playoffs. Whereas like in that situation, the beginning of the season is super exciting for me because I love writing preview content. Like, before the season starts, anything can happen, right? So it's just like, what could happen? Let's look at the tea leaves and try to figure something out. And also with sports that I used to do those big projects where I was ranking basically every player in the entire NHL. And those were super labor intensive. And I got so much information out of doing that like, obviously nobody can watch every game in the entire league. But when you literally break down information on every single player in the league and find out like what's their strengths, what's their weaknesses, you just get this huge influx of ability to write about them, right? Whereas in the regular season, oftentimes Sportsnet has a mandate to cover Canadian teams, right? So like, especially if there aren't any Canadian teams that are good, which has happened a couple times, it's basically just like Leafs over and over again. And you just get like super tired of being like, that Auston Matthews guy, he's like one of the best goal scorers of his generation. He's amazing. Mitch Marner, he's a great playmaker. William Nylander, underrated. Like you're kind of saying the same thing over and over again. Like every year, it's like, is Morgan Riley good or just good offensively? Well, it's the same thing every year.
I always wanted to ask you because you'd always write these stories about the Leafs. And then some of the Twitter comments like noted Leafs fan Andrew Berkshire with his normal Leafs love, and I'm just like, I don't even realize you're not from Toronto.
No, I'm from Alberta. Like born in Saskatchewan. I went to high school in Alberta, and then I moved out to Montreal when I was 18 with my then girlfriend, now wife. And I've got no connection to Toronto whatsoever. I do like covering the team because I think they're super exciting. But in terms of like actual Leafs fandom, zero. Used to be a Canadiens fan. That died. And honestly, I do miss it sometimes, like just the excitement of being a fan. But at the same time, there's just this. It's almost more fun because you control all 31 fan bases, soon to be 32 now, and not have anything that you can't say.
Yeah.
Right. So it's fun. I think the Leafs fan base is the most fun one to make fun of because more than most fan bases, they can take it. Because I think they're the only fan base that hates the Leafs more than everybody else.
Yeah, for sure. I actually, people would keep asking me because I have to have I see a lot of the comment sections for a lot of articles and comments on Twitter, and people say, "Oh, who's the worst one?" And people always assume it's Leafs. I actually think it's the Canucks fans. Sorry to any Canucks fans. I find Canucks fans can be pretty ruthless.
Canucks fans can be pretty ruthless. I mean, on their own team for sure.
For sure, yeah, that's the worst part.
Yeah. Like worst fan base to interact with. I mean, I'm kind of biased because I've been covering them for so long, but for me, it's Canadiens fans. Like, Canadiens fans have always been kind of split, and it's like this group of you're either someone who's like very skeptical of what they're doing, or you're full-on bought in. If you criticize the team, you're not a real fan. And after the Subban trade, most of the skeptical people which was part of what I was part of pretty much, most of those people just stopped paying attention to the team or stopped being fans of the team in general. And so the fan base that's left is still kind of fractured, but like mostly the Pollyanna group. And I don't mean to say like everybody who's left is, but like at least on Twitter, right? On Twitter, It's like if you criticize the Montreal Canadiens, you get a flood of Canadiens fans who just like cannot take it.
Yeah.
And I find like Leafs fans, there are those in that fan base as well. And it's a massive fan base. So you will get some of that, but you'll also get a ton of people who are in on the joke. And I find a lot of the people who are in on the joke for Habs fans just either aren't online anymore or don't care about the team anymore, which is kind of sad.
What always makes me laugh about Leafs Nation is the Civil War. And it's always
Which
a player. Well, the most, let's go with the freshest one. And that's, I mean, the freshest one that's been around for the longest time, it's like the last few years is William Nylander.
Right.
That continues to be the most perplexing one to me in that I feel like there's just two extremes and there's a lack of ability to see that both sides actually have some merit, but also like there's outrageous takes on both ends. I find when it comes to his play, I love the way he plays, and I know you do too. Like the style he plays, and the production he has. And then there's times where I can understand where some people they're not a fan of his game because he doesn't play like an Auston Matthews or he doesn't play like a Zach Hyman, but that's not who he is either.
Yeah.
What's kind of your thought on that?
I mean, I'm kind of with you on like every player has flaws, right? Like with William Nylander, and I got a lot of this last week because I kind of had a bit of a tweet thread on it, and a bunch of people thought I was talking about the Steve Simmons column on Nylander. I didn't even read it because I don't read Steve Simmons because I don't read bad journalism. But
he's not wrong there.
No one's going to argue that.
I mean, I wouldn't click on a Steve Simmons article post the hot dog story. Like this guy's already been proven to be willing to just make things up. So why give him the time of day? But I was just talking in general about like that style of not necessarily reporter, but pundit, right? Like Brian Burke, and not to say that any of these people are awful, but that style, the old guard of hockey media, right? And they don't like William Nylander. And there's a reason why. Part of it is that he doesn't talk, like he has a cold, not disposition, but cold relationship with the media. He just doesn't care about it. And to me, don't care because I'm not in that room. I'm an analyst, not a reporter.
Yeah.
So it's easier for me to ignore that. Whereas the guys who want to quote from William Nylander, it's harder to ignore. But in terms of his play in the defensive zone, absolutely, he does have some issues. He is too lackadaisical at times. He isn't as involved as you'd want him to be, but his overall defensive impact remains strong because he's incredibly good in the neutral zone. So, like, a lot of that stuff that happens in the neutral zone, he doesn't get credit for.
No.
But at the same time, you have to be able to recognize it, and you have to find this balance of he's good overall, but of course he's open to criticism because everybody's open to criticism. So, like, you can't throw out all of the criticism that these people are lobbing at him, but at the same time, any sane person who watches William Nylander day in, day out looks at the numbers that he's able to generate, looks at the fact that over the last 4 years, he's number one on the Maple Leafs in possession driving. Like, no Maple Leaf has a higher Corsi for percentage over the last 4 years than William Nylander, among forwards anyway. I don't think there's anybody on defense that's higher, but I've only checked personally on forwards. Like, he's obviously doing something right. He's obviously a positive impact player. Doesn't mean that he doesn't have faults, but, like, man, if you can't see the forest for the trees on this guy, he's a really important player for that team. Like, the idea that he is a guy that needs to be traded in order for them to have success or get to the next level is so crazy to me, because the gap between, like William Nylander and Mitch Marner, people think it's gargantuan. And I feel like a lot of people want to tear down Mitch Marner in order to build Nylander up, which is also wrong.
Yes.
But the gap is not as large as people think it is. Nylander puts up more points. Or, sorry, Marner puts up more points. But Nylander's the better 5-on-5 player. So both are important. It's good to have both. Is there $5 million of cap hit in terms of value difference between them? I don't think so. And to me, the guy who's underpaid is William Nylander, and he's the one who gets all the grief, which is crazy to me.
That's the part that kills me. It's that the main reason why he's the target of most trade ideas is he has the cheaper contract. Well, shouldn't the cheaper contract be the more value contract? That's what I kept saying too.
Definitely. Well, and there's some people who say, like, because his contract is more valuable, you get more in a trade for him, which I also don't believe, because the value of William Nylander that people are talking about on the trade market is talking about, like, the way old hockey men value him. Guess who's in charge of other teams?
That's the other thing too.
Like, even with Marner making more and, like, his value on the ice being, like, not as high per dollar or whatever as Nylander's is, on the trade market, Marner would get way more. Not that I'm saying they should trade Marner.
No. I mean, I just actually wanted to ask, at what point of the game are you at? Because I know you're catching it a little bit late.
The Canadiens' 4-3 goal just got called back.
Yeah.
That was
an obvious call.
I don't understand how, in a time of, like, they've reviewed it, and then the coach's challenge comes in. I'm like that seems just like,
that was a mess. That was, like, a really weird situation. Yeah, like the good goal, and then it got called back. It's just, I mean, if I was Claude, I'd be just as confused too. But that is what it is,
I don't know where
guess.
they got the original good goal from. I really don't. There was no stick on puck from what I saw.
Yeah, it's just so strange.
I mean, I presume they only called it good because, I mean, you saw the angle from the top of the net that it just slid past Freddie. Like, as soon as Freddie sat up, it was already way beyond, like, the goal line, which I presume is why they called it good. And then the second review, which is, that wasn't fun.
Jose, did you want to ask Andrew about Auston Matthews?
Yeah, no, I think that was one question that
never heard of.
Yeah, no, it's a quiet kid. I think from somewhere in the States, somewhere around there. I think. But no, I mean, it's a question that's. I mean, it's starting to fill up. That's starting to fill up, like get into the minds of a lot of the Leafs fans. Obviously, maybe probably the Leafs fans, but obviously right now, so far in today's game, Auston Matthews with 2 goals. He already has 18 on the year, 18 goals in 19 games, which of course is extremely impressive. So of course, even though it's still somewhat of a shortened season, the question has come up: do you think Matthews can get to 50? With the rate that he's going in right now, which is essentially a goal a game at this rate, unofficial, if you want to say. I know we have to get to the nitty gritty on the sense, but do you think that Auston Matthews, at the rate that he's scoring goals, can you get to 50 in the shortened season?
Absolutely, I think he can. I don't think it's necessarily likely, but I don't know if I've ever seen such a, like, his release is just so ridiculous. It's like stupid. It's not just how quick it is. It's like you talk to professional goalies, and it doesn't matter where the puck is on his blade. You can't tell where it's going to come off his blade. He just has this really quirky, weird release that is so deceptive. Like, obviously, you can't take anything away from Ovechkin being like the greatest goal scorer at the very least of his generation, but probably of all time. But Matthews just has this innate ability that, like, Ovechkin kind of powers things through with volume, and Matthews has some volume, but obviously not Ovechkin level. But in terms of just raw, who's going to put a goal in the net when they have a shooting opportunity, there's no one I'd rather have the puck on their stick than Auston Matthews. Like, he is just obscene. I've never seen him. One player makes so many goaltenders look like they don't know what they're doing. Like, it's just something that shouldn't be a goal. It shouldn't even be a scoring chance. And he rips it so quick, so perfectly, that goalies just cannot stop it. And it's incredible to me. I think that if anyone has a chance of putting up 50 goals in this shortened season, it is him. And I'd love to see him get 50 and 50, just because, like, man, it's been forever since we've seen that. And I feel like we've had a few close calls where, like, it looks like a player might be able to do it and then it falls apart. I'd love to see Matthews do that, just because it's also, how often do you see a player run away with a league scoring title like that? Like, it doesn't really happen anymore. There's so much parity in the league. I'd love to see him just, like, break records.
Yeah, and he's always been a guy that's been so productive at 5-on-5. I always said that what's going to unlock him is the power play production. He was never first power play when he first started in the NHL, which was crazy to me. Like, James Van Riemsdyk, Tyler Bozak, Mitch Marner, like, those guys were getting top power play minutes over Matthews, and I thought that was ludicrous at the time. And now you're seeing, and like now you're seeing it's like that one timer. It wasn't even a thing because he was always on the left side, and he always had the pad and wrist shot. And now he's got the one timer, and it's like his ability to adapt his skill. That's, I think, what makes it more likely that you can see him possibly reaching that milestone. For sure.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I remember, like, the argument that some people had that he wasn't going to fit on there was like, oh, Mitch Marner is a playmaker and Matthews is on the wrong side because Marner likes to play on the half wall. And it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, even when they had Matthews in a position where, like, he couldn't necessarily take a one-timer, there are so many goals that I've watched him score where most players, they need to get the puck off right away, and he gets it to his, like, across his body. The pass comes across his body. He's taking it. He has a bad angle to shoot, and he just has this, like, double clutch. Goalie gets set. Still too late. Like, he just finds a hole. And, like, you just can't deny a player of that skill. And that's one of those little things where, sure, he was a rookie, but you understand why people were always getting on Babcock and why they didn't trust the decisions being made by that coaching staff. Because you can't have a guy who's a 50-goal scorer, essentially, not being on the first wave of the power play. Like, you really not believe he's not talented enough to make it work if you just sit him in a slot and tell him to figure out, like, where exactly he's going to shoot or how he's going to get the puck? Like, just put him there. Take the lumps if it takes a minute to figure it out. Like, it's maddening. I mean, obviously it's over now, but it was really frustrating to watch.
I'm bringing on another friend of mine, Jake Middleton, joining us here for the live stream. Jake, welcome to the party. Joining us with Andrew Berkshire. I know you know Andrew, Jake, for sure
Yes.
through our dealings. Just on Twitter.
Mhm.
We were just talking about Auston Matthews and how just dominant he's been this season.
This is where I'm gonna step off for just a quick second. I'll be right back. So yeah, carry on. I'll be right back.
This is
I'll
where
be
the
right back.
intermission really does come in handy for the breaks when you're on a full watch live stream. And I actually wanted to. I actually apparently they were talking about the US TV deal, which I found pretty interesting. They're saying that ESPN is being considered for the
Yes. Yeah, Elliot just I think it was Elliot or Chris Johnson. They said that it's going to be a part of the TV deal, which is just a complete no-brainer. Yeah, that would be great news for the league. I'm sure it would help them, especially gain a lot of viewership for sure.
Now, Andrew, there was another question about Joe Thornton I had. A friend of mine actually asked on the stream earlier, would it be worth it for the Leafs to maybe move Joe Thornton, even though he's been so good on that top line, to get that second line of Tavares and Nylander going? Would that make sense for the Leafs to do, or do you feel like Hyman being there would be good enough for that unit?
I'm not sure Thornton brings what that line needs necessarily. I mean, playmaking is always good, but I'm not sure. Like, I guess they're not like a high flying speed line, which naturally makes people think that Thornton might be the guy to stick with them because Tavares is not the most amazing skater either. But I kind of like the energy that Hyman brings and the ability to forecheck because Tavares kind of thrives on like not necessarily rebounds, but changes in possession in the offensive zone, whether it's through forechecking or just cycling and jumping into empty spaces. I think Hyman makes more sense as long as Nylander can be a bit of a distributor. And I think for people who've been kind of criticizing Nylander not driving the net as much this year, I think a lot of that is because he's trying to get Tavares the puck. So you have to play a little bit more to the outside to get Tavares to be a shooter. So if they're both driving the net all the time, I mean, it sounds good on paper, but especially with Zach Hyman, who's a bit of a blunt instrument, you have to have somebody playing the perimeter to get the puck to the middle. You can't just always be skating it there because eventually teams are just going to line you up and take you out. So it's I understand the need for it, but also like you just don't want to mess with a great thing either. Like if it's working on the top line, you don't necessarily want to hurt the top line to help the second line. And I think what we're seeing as well is, it's been a slower transition than it probably should have been, but it's quite obvious now that like Tavares is not the first line center on the team, right? They kind of made it seem like that when he first joined the team, but Matthews has been better the whole time, and it's quite clear it's Matthews' team now.
So I also do want to ask you about Montreal because, they're the other team in this game and we don't want to fully go all Leafs, but what surprised you? But what has surprised you about this Montreal team? I know they went through a major, offseason makeover with their forwards and adding in, Anderson, bringing in Toffoli, which I found that was probably the most surprising one that they were able to get him. I felt like that a lot of teams missed out on Toffoli, but what surprised you the most about Montreal so far this season?
I've been kind of surprised at how good Jake Allen has been. I knew he would be a big upgrade for their the backups they've been running through over the last few years, but he's been really, really impressive. Josh Anderson, I think everyone expected a bounce back year after the catastrophic situation that he found himself in last year, but he's just been incredible. He's even faster than I thought, which is nuts to have a big man that quick. I guess it's just like the three lines that they have are really balanced and all very strong. So the fourth line is just decent, which is good enough. I think there's not a lot of necessarily big positive surprises for that team. I think that they are essentially what everyone thought they were going to be, who was paying a lot of attention. They've been dominating play at even strength for years now, but they just didn't have the guns to get some scoring out of it. And instead of getting, a superstar player, they've just added solid scoring depth throughout the lineup. And some games that works out spectacularly for them, and some games they just can't seem to get over the hump because they don't have a superstar. So they're a good team. I don't know if they're going to be a great team. I think they still have some serious weaknesses. And I think that as great as Claude Julien is as a systems coach, he still has a real affinity for competent bums on defense. And the situation with trying to cycle in Victor Mete and Brett Kulak, I'm very surprised that Joel Edmondson hasn't been part of that rotating system of scratches. I don't know why he's immune. I think he is the Canadians' worst defenseman. So it's very interesting to watch him make misplay after misplay. And you know what? Honestly, Ben Sherratt as well been awful tonight. So I'm surprised that him and Edmondson are just immune from being able to be scratched this long into the season. Because Kulak has been great. Victor Mete, the last few games, has proven that he's really important from a transition perspective. So they need to figure out what they're doing on defense a little bit. I think they have some good players, but they kind of have to do it by committee, and I do wonder how much that situation, how far it can get you without any superstars. Because I think their closest to a superstar is probably Jeff Petrie, and he's also the wrong side 30. So it'd be interesting to see in a condensed season how him and Weber break down.
I find it kind of surprising that with the whole Joel Edmondson, how happy Canadians fans were when they brought him in. I thought, with what happened with Cole Alsner, I'm not saying they're the same players, but I'm it seemed like a similar situation where they thought they were getting a very, stud defensive defenseman, and really hasn't been the case in that regard.
Yeah, I don't know why they thought that, because based on the numbers, Joel Edmondson has been among the worst defensive defensemen in the league the last few years. So I don't know if they just saw him good during the playoffs when St. Louis won, but he's not a good defensive defenseman. He has that big body and willingness to be physical that I think a lot of people associate with being a defensive defenseman, but he's pretty porous in his own end. So I'm not exactly sure where that reputation came from. He's more of a guy who takes more offensive risks, to be honest. He has a pretty decent shot. He can create some good plays. He's similar to Ben Sherratt in some respects, although I think Sherratt, when he's on his game, is much better defensively than Edmondson is. It's just both of them, when they get off their game, they run around trying to hit people and ignore the puck, and that's just never a smart way to play in the modern NHL.
It just seems like another thing, with Leafs fans, they've been so big on Justin Hall this season. I think he's been pretty good, but it feels and Justin Bourne wrote an article for Sportsnet about this, and that you can't discount who he's playing with either. That kind of helps him get to where he is. I think if Justin Hall is playing with someone other than Jake Muzzin, I don't know if he's having the same type of season. Is that something that, when you look at and analyze the game, that's a big part of your analysis and breakdown?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think Ben Sherratt would be on a top pair without Shea Weber, right? Although I do think Shea Weber is a tough defenseman to play with in a lot of respects, because he's so conservative in his own zone. He kind of forces his partner to be very active. So if a player can't hack that, it becomes a big deal very quickly. With Edmondson, I mean, Petrie is obviously carrying the bag. Petrie has had such a great start to the season, but you look at his underlying numbers, and it's his worst in several years, and it's clear why that is. It's the guy he's playing with. So it's always part of the equation. It's really tough to separate on ice public data from who you're playing with. That's one of the things that I enjoyed working with Sport Logic for, is you can take individual numbers and figure out what's a player actually doing when he's on the ice. And this is why Auston Matthews was kind of given grief for a long time for not being a very good defensive player. But by the numbers that I had, a lot of defensive metrics that are important, winning puck battles, getting on loose pucks, separating the opponent from the puck, creating possession changes. He was always in the top 10, 15% of all forwards in the league. So, like, yeah, the numbers are getting better now because he's getting better at anticipating important moments, and maybe he's a little bit more committed in his own zone, paying attention and being a team leader. But he's never been bad defensively, even if the on ice numbers were not great. That hasn't really had much to do with him. And a big part of the reason why he's getting a lot of credit right now, in particular, is that this is probably the best defensive play that the Maple Leafs have ever had, or not ever, maybe, but this generation of the Maple Leafs have put forth. Like, they are much better defensively than last year, much better than any other time since Matthews was drafted.
I was going to say, at least since Auston Matthews was drafted, and I think even when you look back, God, I have to say, like, look at Randy Carlyle years and Ron Wilson years, and you want to forget all those because it's just.
Although Carlyle has his own, like, special sauce on defense. Like, his teams just get pounded in shot attempts, but for the most part, they're not high quality chances. So, like, there's a reason why you look at, there's like a huge deal or huge group of goaltenders who've had career seasons under Randy Carlyle. James Reimer, Jonathan Bernier, pretty sure John Gibson started playing great in Anaheim under him. He's an interesting guy because his teams protect the slot really well, but they just aren't very good anywhere else.
Jay, did you have any questions for Andrew?
Yeah, I actually, just to sort of talk about that with possession numbers for it. I always, whenever I watch a team like Carolina, I feel like they're always rated very highly for possession numbers, but I feel like a lot of theirs is overly inflated because I feel like they just have a ton of shots and they're not good shots. Is there like I want to know, like, what's the difference in between for statistics for them for shot attempts, which I'm sure they lead the league because they always seem to throw 1,000 shots to the net, and home plate area chances. Because whenever I watch them, I always look up at the scoreboard and I'm just like, how do they have 50 shots?
Yeah, I mean, they are when Carolina first started to show signs of being like a strong possession team a few years ago, back when Bill Peters was their head coach. That was who they were. They just threw shots from anywhere, dominating teams in shots, but not really getting much in terms of quality chances. That's changed in the last few years. Part of that is like Sebastian Aho developing into who he is, adding Teuvo Teravainen, adding Niederreiter. Like, they've got a lot more talent now than they used to have, and now they're one of the top teams in generating chances. And I think one of the issues with Carolina is that on top of being one of the top teams generating chances, they also still shoot from everywhere. So, like, they pile up shots, and I would say that their percentage of chances from dangerous areas is not spectacular. Like, it's nothing special, but because they're piling up so many shots from all over the ice, their raw totals in like high quality shots are still very good. So they're a team that I think if they hadn't crapped the bed against Boston last year in the playoffs, a lot of people will probably view a lot differently coming into this year. But I think they are a Stanley Cup contender if they can get any goaltending. I think the goaltending situation is the biggest question mark for them. And it seems like they just either haven't.
I don't think they've tried
very hard.
I don't think they've tried at all either.
I don't know if they just don't believe that goaltending is an area to spend money on, which is, possible. A lot of data-driven analysis kind of hints that goaltending isn't necessarily reliable year to year. So maybe they've just decided to hope that one of their guys gets hot at the right time. I just don't think that the guys that they brought in over the last several seasons are that great. I think they went for broke with Scott Darling and got really burned. So maybe they're gun shy on trying to add another named goaltender, but they need to do something there, or else it just seems like a waste to have such good underlying numbers, such a strong team depth-wise, and have top-end talent like Sebastian Aho, and then have, some guy who used to play for Detroit 5 years ago or something end up being their starter in the playoffs and not doing much.
Yeah. And I guess one more question I have watching Montreal, I don't know, whenever I watch them, there's nobody that comes over the boards where I get terrified at all. Like, there's not one. And I kind of wonder, how big a mistake was it for them not full out offer sheeting Aho, as you were just bringing him up, to the point of would Carolina have matched any number, or was that pretty much the perfect number for them, and that was the absolute last possible allotment of signing bonuses and money that was allowable for their ownership? Because I mean, yeah, I just I don't know if it's the fact that the Leafs are playing this good, but I don't think they are personally. I just kind of think this entire Canadian division is crap. I think as a whole, like all the Canadian teams are pretty bad. Outside of maybe the Leafs because they have that talent, but like I agree with what you were saying, but I'm trying to figure out if that was something that you think would make them more of a contender if they had, say, a Sebastian Aho instead of a Toffoli and a Josh Anderson or something like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. It's hard to figure out like what would have happened had they done that. Like what changes would have been made. Would they have the money to sign Toffoli? It's a hard question to answer because they ended up kind of striking gold twice at center. So it's less of a big deal now, but you do want that star player. I think they're kind of in a situation where if you can't grow it at home, it becomes too expensive to do that. And I think you kind of have to look at who the Canadians take in the first round with the picks that would have gone in that Aho deal. Because it would have been like 4 first-round picks if you really want to get them. But at the same time, I liked what Bergevin did there. I know he took a lot of flack for it, especially on Twitter, from like people who think that they're super smart because they view everything after it's already finished. And, hindsight is very easy to criticize with. But, the Canadians kind of intuited that Tom Dundon was cheap and wouldn't sign Aho to a big deal. And a lot of Hurricanes reporters kind of made fun of the Canadians for thinking that. Because, look at how much money this guy has. Look at how much money this guy has. He could do whatever he wants. He could waste money up the yin yang. He bought like a football league and then like folded it for no reason. It's like, okay, fine, but like this guy also wanted to pay a general manager like $150,000 a year.
They're literally the most strange team I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah,
they cut corners in the weirdest ways.
Yeah, and like I'll be fully honest. Like my friend Eric Tulsky works for that team, and I wish him all the success in the world, and I hope he's well paid for what he does because I think he's a genius. But like that team is very strange in that you hear things like wanting to do a general manager search, paying less than what's ever been paid for a general manager in the last 30 years. And then, they pull in like, who knows what kind of names are willing to work for that. And I'm sure that in the end they paid a lot more than what they advertised, but then you heard what they were offering for Aho during that negotiation. It was about like half of what the Canadians offered. So yeah, it's a good idea that they signed that contract and matched it, but I don't think it was as sure a thing from the outside that they were going to match that contract as people wanted to pretend on social media. I think it was a good bet. It would have been better if he went harder for it, but this team would be a different situation with Sebastian Aho. But I think that they're a better team than John is giving them credit for. I think Jake is giving them credit for. I think the Canadian division is not that bad, actually. I think they're definitely better than the division on the West Coast. Like that has basically the Golden Knights and the Avalanche and a bunch of losers. And
perfect time to come back to.
The California teams are just a joke. Like all 3 of them are a joke. They're barely even NHL teams. So I think the Canadian division has a couple of bad teams in Vancouver and Ottawa, but Edmonton is a mediocre team with the 2 biggest offensive superstars in the game, not named Auston Matthews. So they're a team that, they're not great, but any given night they could beat any team in this league. The Winnipeg Jets are another mediocre team, but they have Connor Hellebuck who can change any game. And then I think the Maple Leafs, Canadians, and Flames are all legitimately good. You look at the way the divisions are broken down, and there's a lot of parity in the league, but I think only the East division is like arguably way stronger than the North Division.
If I were to ask you, and this is we'll end, we'll kick you off here, but
Sure.
I mean, I want you to enjoy the game too.
Yeah,
you've been very, very generous with your time. If you were to make a pick for a Stanley Cup contender, or even just a Stanley Cup final, what would it be right now?
Ooh, Stanley Cup final. I'm going to take Carolina and Colorado.
Ooh, okay. Ooh. We spent a lot of time talking about Carolina too, so I think it's only appropriate.
Yeah, I think eventually the Carolina Hurricanes are going to just go crazy in the playoffs, and their depth is going to carry them through. But I don't see anybody beating Colorado this year. Things can happen, they can lose 2 goaltenders to injury like they did in the playoffs last year, but they are so incredible. Depth at every position, and then Nate McKinnon is just nuts.
Do you think Colorado's season last year would have been different if their goalies didn't get hurt in that playoff bubble?
Oh yeah, for sure they would have. I don't think Dallas beats them with a healthy Grubauer in net.
Yeah, I find that very interesting because I think Colorado. Yeah, we always rave about them when we talk about them because of all the guys they've been able to add, and you're just like, how do they add them? Like most of them.
Yeah, where's this cap space coming from? Oh, right, it's Nathan McKinnon making half of what he should be.
Exactly. Exactly. Andrew, I definitely want. Oh, Jake, you have one more question?
Yeah, I got one more question on a Canadian theme thing. With all the stuff that's been going on with the Coyotes, you think, especially with this pandemic, think there's any chance they cut them? They just cut bait with them, and there's a chance that Quebec City comes back in? Because I look at this and, weekly there's some games where, this division could definitely be spiced up. And I can't think of one positive thing that's happened for the Coyotes in 10 years.
Oh, boy.
They made the playoffs last year.
Hooray.
I honestly didn't even know they made the playoffs.
Yeah, they traded for Taylor Hall last year.
I knew that. Yes, I knew that. I completely forgot they made the playoffs.
Yeah, they did. I think they beat the Predators.
Yeah,
I mean, look at the Predators,
which isn't really a great thing. But I just kind of look, and even when ESPN is reporting on these things, which is a rarity, I'm a math major, but I'm not like an accountant. I don't see any way how financially it is responsible for them to just pretty much drag the rest of the league down, because there's no way they're not losing $30 million at this point, because they're spending a lot of money
a year.
Yeah.
How is that possible in a professional sports league in North America? It's something I've honestly had thoughts about for probably 10 years now, but I can't think about how there's not a breaking point, especially with the fact of this pandemic and complete loss of revenue for a team that already loses tons of revenue.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like one of those questions where, like, how long can one team be a gong show before people just get fed up and vote them out? Like vote them off the island, to use a very outdated reference. But I mean, the NHL has just been willing to back that team over and over and over again. They clearly want that market. And when they did make the playoffs back when they were like consistently pretty decent, they were selling out the arena. So I'm with you. I just don't see it there. It seems like such a niche market, but at the same time, you kind of look at like Auston Matthews wouldn't exist without the Arizona Coyotes, right? So like that's probably their biggest contribution to hockey in general.
Yeah, exactly.
Biggest contribution in the last 10 years.
Awesome. That was going to be the point that I was just to back up Andrew, because I was having a conversation with my coworker about the latest, like a scandal, if you want to call it, with the Coyotes. And, one of the points that, I said that too, what Jake was saying, like, should they start considering relocation because of how crazy it is? And then my coworker was saying, but hockey's growing more and more in Arizona, especially I think with some universities now in the state getting hockey programs. So I was like, is that even worth it at the end of the day, with knowing that there's a community growing in that, and just try to fight through it? Or do you just say, forget it, they already got the established base, let's move them anyways, to avoid the tire fire getting worse?
So not to cut off Andrew, but I actually am one of the few people who actually think it would work if they had an arena in a place that was, one, accessible to people.
Yeah.
And like it's awful. It's in Glendale. Why not have it in Scottsdale or downtown Phoenix? And for me, I think the investment for it to work would be probably $1 billion, because you'd need a brand new arena, which they'd hopefully, combine with the Suns. I know they had issues with that arena, but I know they've done great things with Arizona State and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I don't see how you can get an owner who will sign up to basically sink, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into rebuilding something that might not work.
Yeah, and there's no way that any government official in that region should be willing to pay for it either.
No, it was a disaster. It was a disaster the first time they did it, and I love the NHL. I love pro sports, but they should not be paying. They should not be using public money to build these rinks.
Agreed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think that's completely ridiculous. I think there's models that can be made where you can make money, just like the Leafs have done through. Look at their deal with Scotiabank, and the Rangers did it with Chase, where they are basically just getting paid fees from these sponsors up front to renovate their building. And I don't know. That's for me. Like I look at Quebec City, and whenever I look at all the new buildings coming up in Seattle and Las Vegas, which are fantastic and look like they're going to be fantastic markets, I just see that building that's absolutely gorgeous that is sitting empty, which is it's so sad to me, especially with this Canadian division we have. I think it would be great to have an 8th team to sort of round it out.
Yeah, I think for all our perspectives, it'd be great to have the Nordiques back. It would add some craziness to the hockey up here, but at the same time, I think from the NHL's perspective, most of the people who would spend money on a team in Quebec City are spending it now on Montreal Canadiens stuff, right? I think that's the way they see it, is like, what's the growth potential there? And the growth potential in Arizona, despite the team being a joke for the better part of our entire lives, is just way bigger. It's a huge market if they're able to break into it. And I think the NHL still, for some reason, seriously believes that it's going to happen. They just can't seem to get ownership there that isn't trying to screw somebody over or, hucksters. It's a sad situation. And part of the issue, I think, as well in Quebec is the ownership groups that are potential here. It's either Pierre-Carl Pelado and the Videotron empire, which the NHL doesn't seem super enthused to deal with because they're like hard line in the separatist movement here, which is like
I knew it was some political thing.
Yeah, and then like the only other group that would have money is like the Cirque du Soleil stuff, and like, are they even interested? It's hard to know, and other than that, you're getting into like ownership groups, which the NHL seems to not want to do. They didn't like it in Edmonton, so it's hard to know, like, read the tea leaves with that. I almost wonder if before going to Quebec City, also with the division alignments that they've been doing, if they try to move something closer to there, like if Houston gets a team.
That was a team that I think not too long ago was being rumored.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people were bringing up Houston because there's an owner that wants to put a team there.
Yeah, so I think that's more likely if the Coyotes are moved, just because they seem to be working towards balancing the divisions, 8 teams in each, and moving someone into the north kind of unbalances everything again.
I will say I thought it was going to be an epic disaster, them going to Las Vegas. So every move they've made pretty much has been fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
I hate on Gary Bettman for a lot of things, but the idea that he can somehow get the contacts to get so much money into a league that, in my opinion, is really far behind the others, the big two, which is basketball and football in terms of popularity, it's impressive. I mean, how he got $500 million from Las Vegas and then what is it, $650 million from Seattle it's incredible to me.
Yeah, it's really encouraging, and both organizations seem to be really well run as well. Like, on top of the investment of buying a team, both of them seem to be going hard in right away in terms of like building the team, like front office, everything, like, so committed situations. And I think the better expansion draft is probably a bit of a godsend for those teams as well.
Yeah.
They can jump into it right away and be somewhat competitive. So
Mhm.
it's pretty good.
Last question. Right now, if you were offered the GM job for Seattle or Arizona, I think it's pretty easy. You'd take the Seattle job, right?
Well, the thing is, Seattle is going to be compared to Vegas, right? So they have a high bar that you have to meet.
Way too hard.
Arizona, the bar is so low. I think I'd prefer the weather a little bit more in Seattle because I'm just not a super hot desert kind of guy. But man, the idea of just being able to turn Arizona around a little bit, you get so much credit. So I think I'd probably go Arizona.
Wow.
Well, that's a great way to end it there. I want to really thank you, Andrew, for coming, jumping on, and answering all of our questions. We had quite a few of them, so glad you were able to pick up a lot of those for us.
My pleasure, guys.
We'll definitely have to have you on again. I've been trying to get Steve Dangle to join us. He apparently when you have a younger kid, it's a little bit harder.
Yes,
but I definitely want to have the two of you on together because I know that you and Steve go way back. I think it would be live stream glory to have both of you on at the same time.
Yeah, count me in whenever that happens.
All right, we will. I will pressure Steve a lot more now to get it done. All right, thank you very much, Andrew. We'll talk.
Thanks, Andrew.
All right,
Thanks,
sounds
Andrew.
good. Talk to you later, guys.
Have a great night.